Okay, the truth about the end times. That might seem like a strange subject to talk about just before Christmas. But next week I'm going to be starting a series on Advent. And Advent is the advent of the second coming or the first coming, depends on who you are, what angle you're looking from. Which means that the old order is to come to an end. That's kind of a celebration of what it's about. And there's certainly quite a bit written about the end times in the Bible and other places. Actually, I think about every religion has some form of the end times. And we're going to look at a different form today, but I would like to talk about the current form, just some of the thinking that is around it and why it's there. There's a type of writing called apocalyptic writing that you'll find in the Bible, and the books of Daniel and Revelation are the kind of the most popular presentations of it. But there are apocalyptic references all through the Bible. If you're reading the Gospel of Mark, for instance, the 13th chapter is known as the Little Apocalypse. And you'll be reading along about Jesus, and then suddenly he goes into this very prophetic time of talking about destruction of the temple and this and that, and how not too many people will be spared as the result of it. And scholars acknowledge this as a later insertion that was not in the original text, but it's a genre of writing, and it always involves great cataclysms, and usually the stars are falling from the sky and the sun goes out and all the different cosmic things happen. And they happen because it's triggered by the sins of humankind, and that would be you and I, all of us, that God has reached a point of saturation where it's time to bring this current era to an end and start something new. And that's really what the whole birth of Jesus is. It was people waiting for a Messiah, waiting for the old order to end and something new to begin. And that was, in the case of Jesus, they named him as the Messiah. He actually denied several times that title, but it stuck, so we're with it now. And what's interesting about mainline Christianity is it began with the advent of Jesus. He's gone, and now we're waiting for him to come back and start this whole new age. And so I think there's something that's missing, a very big missing piece, and we'll talk about that. But the idea of a doomsday prediction is not out of line necessarily. And I wanted to talk just a little bit about that, because throughout human history there's much evidence of great cataclysms occurring. There are floods, hurricanes, massive volcanoes, earthquakes, tsunamis. We saw one of those in 2004 that killed 250,000 people. Pretty phenomenal. Asteroids. They took out the dinosaurs apparently 65 million years ago, and there's even solar flares that have wreaked mass destruction across the planet. We don't hear a lot about solar flares, but I want to talk about those in just a moment. But there's all of these natural things that have occurred, and of course every time we see one, we've seen just about all of these things occur. In fact, we've seen solar flares occur, and there was one that occurred in 1853, I think, and that was before we had computers and all of our electronics. But it wiped out the telegraph system pretty much, and it was a small one. And so if another substantial solar flare, if the sun hiccups again, in that degree, all of our computer systems will probably be fried. So just that in itself, would be a pretty major thing. And of course, all of our evangelists would jump up and say, God's getting sick and tired of us, so he's, this is a sign that we're going to be destroyed. But that thinking of a cataclysm occurring is probably grounded in actual history. And it very well could be, too, that the flood story is, just last month, this asteroid flittered through our solar system. I don't know if you were aware of that. It's about a quarter mile long. It's a weird looking thing. It's an interstellar asteroid. And I didn't know what that really meant, but it's an asteroid that has come from another star system. And it's been floating through space for probably billions of years. And it just came through our solar system, and it came in a direction opposite of all the rotations of the planets and all that stuff. It's very weird. Scientists were thrilled. They thought it was pretty cool because they'd never seen it. It's the first one anybody's ever seen. This is not an actual photograph of it, of course, but they will probably come up with one before it's over. This is an artist's rendition. But if that thing happened to hit the Earth, we wouldn't be having a Sunday morning service. You know, it'd be kind of ruin our days. And those things have happened. So there is a memory of them happening. If you've ever been to Meteor Crater, I think that one happened about 50,000 years ago. Beth and I were over there at one time. It's a very impressive thing, and they say that was a small asteroid that hit, or a meteor that hit. But something happened about 12,900 years ago that many scientists are now looking at in a very different light. And I'm kind of laying the groundwork here for what I want to talk about with the end times. But the last major ice age began about 2.6 million years ago, and it started to end around 12,900 BC. So it was coming to an end, and then all of a sudden it started up again. The Earth was starting to warm, and then it started to freeze again. So they think there was some event, and some of the speculation it was a comet or something hit the Earth. And many think up in North America, there was about a 2-mile ice sheet at the time. And so it hits, and it caused a catastrophic event. The Earth started cooling down again, it froze up again, and that doesn't mean the whole Earth, but the ice age continued for another 1,200 years. And that period of time from 12,900 to 11,700 BC is called the Younger Dryas period. It's a geological period of time. But at the end of that period, at about 11,700 BC, the climate went from really cold to really hot. And scientists used to think that was over a couple of centuries, but now what they're saying, what they're discovering, is that was more like a period of days and maybe hours, maybe overnight. And what happened? What would cause that type of global warming? And some of the scientists think that it was a solar flare of major proportions, and that it was so severe that it caused these 2-mile ice sheets to melt and flood. And what's interesting about this, and I'm not going to go too far into this, but this 11,700 BC is about the time Atlantis was supposed to have sunk. And there are several things that happened. And some people are saying that Atlantis was not necessarily a place, but it's every place. That there was global flooding. We know the sea levels rose at that time dramatically, and there's a lot of aspects of civilization under the ground, or under the water, that they're looking at. So our flood story, which actually is tied in, our biblical flood story is tied into some ancient Babylonian texts, and it goes way back. But those Babylonian texts also could go even further back. They could be grounded in something as well. So what I'm saying here is that the Earth takes a pretty big hit once in a while, and it was at the end of this Younger Dryas period where mastodons went extinct. Many animals went extinct as a result of this catastrophe, probably a flood, solar flare. They said it would have caused earthquakes and all kinds of things to happen at that time. So some of these thoughts about the end times today could actually be grounded in history, in just ancient passing on of these things, this horrible thing that happened. And what people say, what many scientists say is, well, there was no civilization prior to that. All people were hunter-gatherers, and so whoever survived that, survived it. But we now have evidence that civilization goes back a little further than we thought. In 1994, this site was discovered in Turkey, Göbekli Tepe, I think it's called, and maybe you've heard about it. It's just kind of rising into the consciousness of science now, because it has been absolutely dated, over 10,000 years old. And what it is, what you're seeing there, according to what they tell us, is this is just a fraction of what has been exposed by archaeologists. There was a German archaeologist that discovered it and started excavating it back in 1994. He died, but the Germans are still working on it. But it is a phenomenal representation of something people do. It's sort of like a Stonehenge, and I was just listening to a program on Stonehenge that said that was the oldest man-made structure on the planet. That's how old the scientists used to think of it. Well, this predates that by about 6,000 years. So it's new information that we have. So the question is, this place would have been around during the end of that last ice age and prior to that. Because if you get something this sophisticated, this far along, you know it has a history itself. And when you look at these stones, and they're huge, I mean, they're really big, but they are so perfectly cut. It's just phenomenal. Stonehenge is pretty rough, but these things are like cut beautifully, and there's all kinds of animals and people and so forth carved into them. I tried to get a little better picture here, but it's not very good. But anyway, the people covered this whole site, and I think I told you a couple of weeks ago, it's about the size of, they say, 20 football fields, the whole area. And all they have uncovered at this point is a very small part, but they've done the, what do you call it, the radar that they send underground and so forth. They've picked up footprints of other aspects of this. So what it is saying is that civilization's been destroyed before. It's not a new thing, and it's not destroyed because these people were sinners or whatever. This stuff happens. We live in a very dynamic universe. The planet is very dynamic, and it is, people are always trying to figure out when we're going to get ours. You know, when all the sins and evil stuff that's going on in the world is going to come to an end. The most important end times that we can look at are the ones, that end time that is happening in each of us at this moment. It is a process that we're going through, and I would describe it as we're going from an awareness of ourselves as body-based beings, self-image, to a soul-based, spiritual-based understanding of ourselves. We are eternal beings, and we have probably been on this planet many times. I have no proof of that. It's just that I believe it's true. But nobody has proof that it's not true, so it's kind of a whatever you want to believe. But there's a battle going on in each one of us. We're here on this planet trying to figure out, trying to come up with a spiritual formula that will help us succeed in living successfully on this earth. And it's going on all the time because, as I pointed out many times, the body is a vehicle that we are carrying around, and it's pretty high maintenance. The soul is not high maintenance. The soul is indestructible. It has no maintenance needed. And I have pointed out that I think the whole idea of the soul evolving is a myth, that it's not true. That the soul, our soul, every soul is complete. But we are so asleep in this body. And we're looking out at the earth, we're seeing all the imperfection, and we create religions that have God punishing people and for their sins and all. We come up with all these 7 deadly sins and all the sins that we talk about. You know, when I was growing up, the Baptists would say dancing's a sin. And there are a lot of people that dancing's part of their religion. So somebody's in trouble. Somebody's wrong or in trouble. And like I asked last Sunday, what religion is God? You know, this is all a bunch of weirdness. You know, we don't really need this kind of thing. But we are all going through a struggle. And that is, we are a soul that is going through this human experience. And the body is very high maintenance. Most of our thinking is centered around maintaining it, around keeping it up. All of the apocalyptic writing that you see in the Bible was written at a time when somebody, whoever the writer was under persecution. And so they were looking for a time when the persecutors would be punished and they would be set free. The ones that were being persecuted would be set free. Revelation is all about the Romans and the Christians. Christians were set free in about 325 AD when Christianity was finally legalized. But what do the Christians do? They turn around and start wiping out everybody else that doesn't support their beliefs. The Gnostics were attacked. Several people that had views of who they thought Jesus was that were different from the main line were attacked, and they were burned at the stake. They were butchered in every way imaginable. It's just unbelievable. And all in the name of God. And so we're sitting here, there's a whole element of people that are waiting for this whole earth thing to end. And all of the good people will be left, and it obviously will be them, you know, the ones that are thinking of that. And I don't want to be one of them, because I can't imagine spending eternity with 144,000 Jehovah's Witnesses. It just would be not my idea of heaven. But that's just me. But that's how crazy it is, you know, that we would come to believe that we have this God that would single out people and say, what you believe and what you think is right and what you think is wrong, and I'm going to destroy you. But that process is happening in us. The soul is the right way. It is the natural expression of God, the natural spiritual expression. It's that deepest level of our being. And that rises to the surface. Our consciousness then looks out at the world, and we start bringing information in. We start bringing in religions. We start bringing in philosophies. We start bringing in influence from the outside, and we think, well, that could be true, maybe not true, and I pick and choose what makes sense to me, and I create this thing called the spiritual path that probably has nothing to do with the spiritual path, because the soul is the spiritual path, and it is here expressing through this body, and it is subject to a consciousness that's not accurate. We call it race consciousness. We call it ego. We call it personality. It's the surface level. I call it self-image. It's the surface level of us, and it is inaccurate. But we're trying to live our lives as if it is true. And so we pull ourselves back, and through our times of meditation, the soul emerges. The natural impulse of the soul is to express. And if we're still enough, if we let go of the intellect, if we let go of the outer thoughts, the outer perceptions that we have, the self-image, and let the soul rise, it's the still small voice of God. As we let that rise, it begins to teach us who and what we really are. And that's the battle. That part of us that is telling a lie, that is trying to live a lie, that's trying to make sense of a lie, that's the part that is to go. And the soul emerges. And it's like in this lifetime, maybe that'll never happen. Maybe the soul will be suppressed through the whole thing. But the bottom line is, if you want to know the truth that sets you free, this is kind of a standard Jesus put out there. You'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. The soul is the truth. Our spiritual center is the truth. And as we touch that and know that, we begin to experience freedom. We stop trying to set things right outside of ourselves as much as we find that freedom inside, as we experience it within ourselves. Because if you're free in yourself, it doesn't much matter what's going on outside. People don't upset you that much. When I see people talking about end times because an asteroid flew by or whatever, it doesn't even move me one way or the other. I just don't even care. I've heard that so many times. Beth grew up with it. All the family was always arguing about when the end times were coming, and you read the events of the world like tea leaves, trying to figure out when it's going to happen. She grew up with Jehovah's Witnesses. And I'm not picking on Jehovah's Witnesses. As far as I'm concerned, they're all crazy, but that's just me again. But it is, what is this spiritual thing? What is a natural flow? What is a natural unfolding that is going on? What is this spiritual thing that we're dealing with? And that is a natural unfolding of God through us. There is a way that works and a way that doesn't. And we have picked up many ways that don't. Many ways that are out of harmony with what is true of the soul. And so we try to reconcile that. We try to make that work. We try to find the right religion. We try to find the right philosophy, the right something that will make that work. And we spend a lot of time and then trying to make that work, and it doesn't work. But there are whole groups of people saying that, no, none of that works, that those people are doing, but what we're doing works, so you hang around with us, when the world ends, you'll be okay. It's not an outer thing, it's an inner thing. It's each one of us waking up quietly to that inner process, that inner thing. So we see a battle going on within ourselves, that struggle between what we sense is true at our deepest level and that more surface side that often runs counter to the spiritual center. We grapple with appearances versus truth, head versus heart, intellect versus intuition. This is not an easy thing because we live in a world that is dominated by intellectual thinking. We hold that as the prize. That's what all of our degrees are based on. That's what all of our educational institutions are based on, is filling the intellect with information. And what I'm pointing out here with this ancient civilization, suddenly all that intellectual information is having to be rewritten. It's not true. Or they're finding that there's another way to look at the whole thing. So that's how easily it can be toppled. But we are not physical bodies. We inhabit a body. And what is the we that inhabits it? That's our work. That's our spiritual journey. That's our job, to get to know what we are at this deeper level. And then the other side begins to make sense. The advent of the Messiah represents the resolution to this struggle. And just look at all the predictions. When the Messiah comes, the world for certain people is going to be better, because he's going to come, and a couple of the Jewish sects saw that as a military takeover. That's what Judas was all about. The ones that carried the knives under their cloaks, they were waiting just any minute for a great revolt. And the Essenes did that. They tried it. They were wiped out pretty much. But it's not an outer thing. The Messiah is not someone that's going to come down out of the clouds. It is a level of your being that rises up to your awareness. And you realize, I'm not this body. I am an expression of something much deeper, something cosmic, something universal. And as I get to know that, as I become grounded in that, then my life begins to stabilize. My relationships begin to stabilize. My work begins to stabilize. Everything in my life begins to stabilize. I find that kingdom first within myself. It's not low here or low there. It's within. And I find that stabilization, and I stop looking for the rest of myself out there. That's what this Advent, that's what this whole expectation of the end times is all about. Something out there is going to make my life better, and it won't. I guarantee if an asteroid hits the Earth, it's not going to make your life better. It's going to ruin your golf game. So our experience on this earth is but a fraction of our soul's journey, and that's a very important thing to remember, especially when you see people dying around you. And, we all do that. We see people die around us, and we think about the value of life and how short it is, and all that. We measure ourselves by the body, but that's not what we are. So our experience on this earth is but a fraction of the soul's journey. We're truly spiritual beings involved in a very human experience. We don't want to deny that. It is. There is high maintenance to the body. But the end times are really our own personal awakening to the truth of who and what we are at the deepest level. What ends is a way of thinking about ourselves. That is a body-based identity. I'm not that. That's what ends. That's what begins to end and does finally end. I am a spiritual being going through a human experience, having this human experience. And for a long time, I hold that as a thought, as a belief, part of my belief system. But then the day comes when you wake up to that. You know that's true. And when that person drops dead over there, you don't see it as such a bad thing. That's just one phase of their life. And you're going to do it too. It's not a bad thing. That there's this larger picture. And we don't live simply for the larger picture, but we live from that level of understanding, from that place. And it makes this world, I think, a very fascinating place just to see and to think. I'm very interested in these ancient people, not because I think there was something so much better. We don't know anything about these folks yet. We're just starting to learn. And they may have had all the same problems we have. I don't think they had cell phones, but they may have had other problems that generated by whatever their thinking was. But they certainly had a major problem of either solar flares or asteroids or whatever. So nothing they did stopped that. And there were obviously survivors from that whole period. But that's what some scholars are beginning to think, that we have this very ancient memory tied into that ancient history. And so to me, that's a very interesting thing. So I'm glad to be on this planet. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be in this body having this experience. But this is not me. This is not you. This is just a part of who and what we are at the deepest level. So the end times is coming to that place in yourself where you know beyond doubt that you are a spiritual being and an eternal being. You find your center of power from there. All right? Thanks for coming out. And as I said, I will be starting a series on Advent. We'll begin with, and it's going to be unique to this church. The first topic will be life. We'll deal with the 4 fundamentals of God, and then that will culminate in our Christmas candlelighting service, which this year will be on Sunday night. Christmas Eve is on Sunday night. So we'll have a Sunday morning service and a Sunday evening service. Okay, thanks for coming out. See you next week.